we're going to talk about three things today. Firstly, Europeana. Our special guest Paul Keller is going to talk about that. And then we're going to have a discussion about open data. And then we're going to run through a survey we did with collecting societies within the national associations of CEPIC to identify areas where possibly it could work better for our industry. If you don't know me, I'm John BALEAN. I work at TopFoto, and 2 years ago we were invited to start be a participant in a Europeana project. We were sort of a little bit unsure about how this was going to work, and after all of the initial paperwork and the start of it, it's turned out to be a very interesting project for us. We're working with museums from 19 different partners around the EU. They're all in an interest area which we are also involved in, which is photography between 1839 and 1939. So the result of that is producing very interesting material. It's mostly a content scanning project. We've also had lots of discussions with IPR and various other things, and that's partly why we want to talk about open data today. But to tell you a little bit more about Europeana, which is, questions I always get, oh, I heard you're in a Europeana project, can you tell me how I can get involved? I'm hoping Paul Keller will be able to describe a little bit more about that and what it involves. So I'll leave it to him to talk about that. He's from Kennisland, but he's also an advisor to Europeana. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, hi everybody. I think I'd rather stand. So as John mentioned, and thanks for the invitation by the way, my name is Paul Keller. I am director of Kennisland, which is a think tank in Amsterdam, and we do lots of work in the cultural heritage sector, specifically around innovation, access to new publics, and intellectual property rights. And as part of this work, we've been, over the last 5 years, very closely working with Europeana in a number of different projects. That goes back from 2008 when we started developing a licensing framework to Europeana, that has evolved into us becoming basically the core partner for all licensing related work with Europeana. And we're working at the moment on projects that mainly focus on trying to increase creative reuse of material that is available via Europeana. So I'm talking a little bit about Europeana as a whole. Sometimes I mention this project, Europeana Creative, which is one of the projects currently, main projects undertaken by Europeana, because that's maybe the most topical to the issues at hand here. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with Europeana. I recognize some of the faces. Who has never heard about Europeana? Apart from me just talking about it right now. Oh, there's even people who've never heard about it. As it turns out, I have a slide which poses this question that you probably have then. To try to give you an answer is, so Europeana, or historically seen, Europeana has grown historically out of the concern of a number of European heads of states that access to cultural heritage in the digital realm was something that was mediated mainly by American commercial platforms, specifically Google. When Google started like the books digitization project and image search and something, you may or may not remember a discussion in Europe, if you are from Europe, at least, which was about, is it a good thing that we entrust like access to our digital culture heritage to basically American commercial companies or not? And out of that was, which at that point was built as like the European answer to Google Books, that shaped into Europeana. What Europeana is today is a large metadata aggregator which tries to aggregate as much information about cultural heritage objects that are made available by museums, archives, libraries, and lots of other types of organizations across Europe, and provide a unified point of entry where you can search in this material, where you can browse the metadata associated with it. Europeana tries to structure the metadata so it's interoperable, because this is really an effort to bring together like a very diverse range of organizations who contribute from all across Europe, and this means that Europeana is something that needs to work for a huge national library like the British Library, which is really a completely professional organization, and for a small museum somewhere in a Spanish province who may or may not have very, very limited resources in actually making material available online, and everything in between. So, and in this place, I mean, I guess we're discussing mainly access to images and photos, but you need to keep in mind when you look at and when you listen to this, what Europeana is, it is also for images and photos, but that also needs to work for other types of objects, think books, maps, even 3D objects, archive pieces which come with very difficult structures, and everything in between. So it's a bit of a general thing, and we're discussing one very specific thing. Keep that in mind when you think, why are they doing these things if there's much better ways of dealing with photos online, because we're not only dealing with photos. To give you an idea, and maybe it's good to have a little bit of terminology, because generally that is something which leads to confusion a lot of times when you talk to specialized audiences like this one. So when we say Europeana has this big difference, we deal with metadata, like we make a big difference between metadata, so the descriptive information about objects, and the content itself. Metadata is something which is submitted to Europeana, which is stored by Europeana, which is published by Europeana, and the content, the photos or the digital objects are not in general. One little exception is what we call previews, and I think that is a term which is slightly differently used in this thing. With previews, we really mean like the small thumbnail type image, which if we have a visual object in Europeana, which gives like a preview of how that will look about. So this is what we call a preview. Please keep this in mind. I'm aware that the term's used differently here. So this is the preview. This is, in this case, all the metadata which has been submitted by, in this case, Nathalie or Nathalie's organization to Europeana. So all this stuff, what you see here, is stored on Europeana, and this is something which you can, like this particular object, you can find by searching in Europeana, and if you have found it, you can click at it, and it will give you like this This is also still, I guess, a preview, but this is already something which is not stored on Europeana server anymore. This is a link to, it's taken from whatever system, in this case, Nathalie's organization is using, and it gives it something. If you click on it, you get this kind of like a better look at it, but the point is you click on that thing and Europeana brings you in the end to the digital object, the photo in question, on the website of the data provider. So that's what we're doing. So what Europeana really owns and controls is really only the descriptive metadata, and by contributing Europeana, you're also authorizing Europeana, or an organization authorizes Europeana to display a preview image. All of this is completely reusable. All of this is open data on this side. What here, like the image you see, there is a rights statement under it which says free access, rights reserved. So this is, in this case, not open data. You can access it, but it's not something that you can reuse and that can be used by third parties. And that's obviously also the case for the material on the website of the data providers, if this is the case. We also have, and I can come back to that, we also have material which is freely reusable here, which Europeana tries to push. But in this case, like if a data provider gives this material and says this is something where we have rights in it, we respect that and we try to communicate that as clearly as possible to the visitors of the website. Where are we? So this, to go back to what is Europeana, to give you a basic understanding of how big or small, I don't know, how you look at this, Europeana is. At the moment, Europeana contains about 33 million, or it's almost 34 million digital objects, which come from more than 2,000 data providers. So very different types of data providers. Some have very small collections. I think there's some of them in the 10s or 20s. There's some data providers who've given us millions of objects. It's generally the bigger national library type of things, of which 20 million or 20.4 million relate to images, and images are not necessarily always photos, because we have a lot of museums who contribute like digital reproductions of works of art. We have quite a lot of maps in it, but this can also be scans of all kinds of artifacts which are kept in musea, for example, or reproductions of particular objects, all kinds of different stuff. The photos come, like if we look at the photos in Europeana, we have this specific, what you mentioned, the project Europeana Photographie, which brings together a number of museums, but also commercial photo archives, and I don't know exactly what type of other organizations. So that is one important source of photos in Europeana. For the rest, the majority of the photos probably comes from archives. Think national archives, municipal archives, regional archives, who tend to have photo collections, mainly documentary style, everyday life documentation stuff that is in Europeana. That is probably the bulk of it. Some museums obviously have photo collections, and we have Europeana also takes, not in general terms, but Europeana tends to have these user-contributed content campaigns. For example, we just had we're in the middle of a really broad thing where we solicit from individuals across Europe digital artifacts that relate to the First World War. And that also results in photos given to us directly from what we call end users then, which is user-contributed content in the end. But we're not like a YouTube style or Flickr style or whatever platform where just about anybody can upload their material without any curation. We try to really focus this on cultural and scientific heritage with a focus on Europe, but that's also not really exclusive. To give you an idea, like I've just showed something else. This from another partner in the Europeana Photography project that is like if I understand that correctly, the National Archive of Catalonia. They have like about 25,000 photos in there. You see, like this is kind of like this everyday life, documentary, political events, things. You see here, like this is again like a results page, which you get. In this case, it's a photo of a woman in a workshop making uniforms for the Republican forces in the Spanish Civil War. And if you click on this, it gets you through indeed to which I take then is the web page of the National Archive of Catalonia, and there you can go through to like the full image resource, which you can find. But all of these last two ones are really not on Europeana. You will have left Europeana and you're now on the websites of these photo archives, and obviously we do not extend any control over that or have any rules what happens there. To go a little bit further, it's been mentioned before, and it's one of the more persistent discussions that we're having with our data providers is obviously the discussion about the rights in the objects. Generally, Europeana wants to encourage reuse of material. It wants to make material available for educational uses, but also reused by the creative industries. And as part of that, we've, over the last 2 years, we've had a very intensive campaign where, like, our #1 objective is to get, for every object which we have in Europeana, a rights statement. Europeana has a licensing framework which provides a number of standardized rights statements, which allows you to filter when doing searches on the rights status. For example, you can ask, give me everything which is, like, give me search results, but only search results which apply to objects which are in the public domain. Or you cannot do that, you can look for Creative Commons licenses, so you can filter for rights status. And in the beginning, we didn't get this rights information, at least not in a standardized way. In 2011, we made this mandatory, and we've been, as you can see here, at the beginning of 2012, we had a situation where about half the material, or more than half of the material, didn't contain any information about the rights in the material which was given to Europeana. We've been working very intensively with data providers over the last couple of years to try to bring this red part, where it is objects which do not contain information about the right status, down to 0. We're currently at 18%, but we're doing some final operation at the moment, which should result in us in July or August actually having no more objects which don't have a rights status in Europeana. What you can see in here, so this applies to all of, like, this is percentages of all those 33 million objects that are in Europeana at the moment. You can see, if you look here, that we have, apart from those about 20% which don't have right status anymore, about like 43% are in copyright, where, like, there's no rights granted to third parties. We have about 16% of the material there which is under one of the Creative Commons licenses, so there is some rights granted to third parties who want to reuse this material. It generally can be shared for non-commercial purposes. In some cases it can be also shared for commercial purposes, reused in commercial context, as long as attribution is given to the rights holders or someone indicated by the rights holder. And 24%, so about a quarter of the material, that's 8 million objects at the moment, are in the public domain, so they're, in general, that's objects where the copyright has expired in those objects. We are really pushing towards, like, we're trying to work with data providers to get more and more material into Europeana, which can also be reused by third parties, be it in educational contexts or in commercial context or whatever. So you see, what you see in this trend line, obviously, like, we're trying to bring back the information, the objects which do not have rights information associated to it, but we're also trying to encourage our data providers to provide material wherever possible under rights statements that allow reuse, and that will be the green and the yellow part back there. Reuse of Europeana content. In the beginning, Europeana was really an effort which was mainly like, let's bring together as much as possible of this material, let's provide, like, an overview of, like, what is available in digital form from the riches of Europe's cultural heritage institutions. And Europeana's strategy is slowly evolving towards that we really also want to be a platform which encourages, which distributes material for reuse by third parties. And Europeana, this Europeana Creative project is fairly instrumental in it. Like, the purpose of that project is it aims to support and promote the reuse of cultural resources available via Europeana. And this is one project, again, something with, like, almost 40 partners, which is funded by the European Commission with 5 million euros. And so this reuse thing is not only something which is important to Europeana, it's also very important to the European Commission, which you can really see by the fact that a year afterwards they funded another project, which is very, very similar to Europeana Creative. It's called Europeana Space, which has almost exactly the same ambition. So they've put 10 million euros on the table to really get more reuse out of the content which is available in Europeana. So that is not only a strategic orientation that is undertaken by Europeana, but that is also by a objective of the European Commission, which to this date is the primary, almost the exclusive funder, with a couple of contributions from individual member states, but the primary funder and driving force after Europeana, behind Europeana. So as part of this, Europeana is currently developing a content reuse strategy that focuses really on trying to encourage data providers to make more high quality reusable material available via Europeana. So reusable for us means has a couple of technical components, so it needs to have a certain, obviously a certain quality. Like if it's tiny, it's probably less useful an image than like if you have a higher resolution thing for reuse. It also means, of course, that it needs to be available under conditions that allow reuse. And I see you all making pictures of this. I'm happy to share. Yeah, it's okay, but I'm also going to, hopefully, we'll find some way to share that presentation with you. Whatever you prefer. We're developing in this Europeana Creative Project a number of tools at the moment at the back end of Europeana that will allow us to highlight high quality reusable content that is available in Europeana. So you, for example, could limit your searches to material which has certain technical qualities, to say, like you want something, you're looking for an image because you want to use it on a website, but you need at least 600 pixels wide. Currently, you can't really specify these kind of like technical requirements. What we're building right now will allow you to search like you do with Bing or with Google Images, that you can say, I need something which is at least X amount of pixels wide or high. So we're building these tools to make it easier for parties interested in reusing material that they find on Europeana or they find via Europeana to limit their searches to stuff that is actually meets their requirements there. You can search like other things we're building, like limit searches to certain file types, to have certain like bit rates if it's about video context, or if you're looking for books, like if you have something like that texts are full text searchable, something. So we're building a little bit more technical filtering capabilities into the back end of Europeana. This is something which is ongoing, and we're expecting like most of this to come online in the fourth quarter of this year. So hopefully in the fourth quarter of this year you can go to Europeana and do something like I need an image and I need it to be at least this big, which you currently can't do. And as part of this, obviously, like we can build this technical capacity to allow users to filter their searches in this way. But obviously, we also need the content that actually meets these requirements. So the other side, the flip side of this content reuse strategy really is that we're thinking about ways, how can we better encourage data providers to give us high quality versions of the material. And high quality is a very malleable thing. Like high quality in our thinking at the moment means something which is like suitable for screen users. So think like pixel resolutions up to maybe something like 2000 pixels wide or something, which think an iPad screen currently.
But if you speak of reuse, you speak of free reuse?
We're generally speaking about free reuse at the moment, because Europeana is really a platform and not like a market intermediary. So we are not equipped at the moment to facilitate commercial transactions. I'm going to come back to that. So if it's directly about, we're really speaking in your terms open data free reuse here. So where it is, and that could be something, obviously, if material is in the public domain and no one owns the rights anymore, then it's free use for everything. We have a lot of providers who give us material under Creative Commons license who say like this can be freely used for non-commercial purposes, for educational purposes, but not for commercial purposes. That is reusable in our terms, not by everyone, but by non-commercial entities in educational settings, or by individuals who like run a blog or something. And in that case, that's free reuse. So we're speaking about free reuse here because Europeana doesn't have the infrastructure and is probably also not very well equipped, being a relatively slow, bureaucratic organization, to act as a intermediary in commercial transactions. I'm going to come back to that in an example where we think like how we can maybe facilitate something like that, but at the moment when I say reuse, I mean free reuse indeed. So we're encouraging people to give us higher quality material. That higher quality means in images, obviously, that's mainly about pixel resolutions, also about things like the absence of watermarks, or visible watermarks at least in things. The same thing when it comes to books or something, it's more about like the file formats which they are presented in. Is this searchable? Can you cut and paste from this? So it differs a little bit from file format to file format. The obvious question is, why would data providers give something to us which is of high quality? Why would they give away high quality assets for free reuse by just about everyone? Which is, and we're currently putting a lot of thought in it, and I guess like most of you in the room, I would guess, are not necessarily from public sector institutions, but keep in mind that Europeana first and foremost is a completely publicly funded operation which is run by, funded by the European Commission. The majority of stakeholders in Europeana tend to be publicly funded cultural heritage organizations, the big archives, museums, libraries, who all do make available, who have a tradition of keeping or amassing collections and making them available on behalf of the public, for the public, and for a lot of them really means also reaching out to the internet and making material available for reuse. Lots of organizations, generally not the commercial organizations, but lots of public organizations start to see this as part of their mission. And Europeana specifically also has a public domain charter where we really think we are the guardians of the public domain in Europe in the digital realm, where we say it's our mission to ensure that the material which is not owned by anyone is freely available to anyone, because this is a big operation funded by public money, and often this content has been preserved by public organizations with public money on behalf of the public. So that's one very important reason why organizations, and generally in this case the publicly funded organizations, give us material, also tend to give us high quality imagery which is absolutely freely available for all forms of reuse. One of the best known examples is, for example, the Rijksmuseum, which has a collection of 115,000 objects which are all available via Europeana without any limitations, in resolutions up to 4,500 pixels on the longer side. So this is really how they choose to fulfill their role. Generally we see lots of organizations give us smaller material, apply some, if they have rights in the material, apply some restrictions to it. But as said, we're trying to encourage this. We're not excluding anything from Europeana, but we're really thinking the future of Europeana and the usefulness of Europeana lies really being able a resource for material that can be reused by others. A number of things how could we, for organizations, and obviously there's not not only this pure public institution and the pure commercial organizations. A lot of organizations, especially with cultural policies in Europe at these times, are somewhere in between, where they get some government subsidies but also are expected to generate revenue from the market. So we're dealing with a range of different organizations here, and I think it's really interesting for us, specifically those institutions in the middle who are not clearly commercial undertakings and not maybe fully free public operations, how to work with them to allow them to contribute material to Europeana that is reusable. And there's a couple of thought experiments at the moment. This is nothing it may look as if this is screenshots, but this is really mock-ups at the moment. Where we're thinking, for example, that we are encouraging, saying if you give us something that conforms to the minimum technical requirements we have, we're also happy to provide you with a link to a web shop on your own website for a higher or better quality version, where we try to direct traffic to commercial offerings by these archives, so that you have, and this is again this example I started with, again from La Parisienne. So if you find something on Europeana, you can obviously click on it and you get this, but you can click through to the website itself. And then you get this, or you have this direct link to a web shop, which doesn't exist. So I made a mock-up of a web shop here. Nathalie knows this already because she's seen this before. But on the other hand, there's also, as part of this deal, there is a direct link to a high-quality image via the Europeana API. this idea of encouraging reuse very much hinges on the idea that we offer all material which is available on Europeana via a number of APIs as well, and that would get a developer who wants to build a whatever, like an iPad app or something, like to have access to a higher quality image file, which then probably logically would need to sit somewhere in between the thing which is available on Europeana directly on the portal. It obviously needs to be smaller somewhere than the thing that you can buy on the web shop. So it would be somewhere in between. So this is one of the thought experiments which we're having. Like maybe we can encourage people to give us reusable thing by giving them something back, like promotion of their commercial offerings.
And I have to say that this size of images is absolutely Paul's suggestion, and in no way anything we are considering at the moment.
You will have noticed that I did. You will have noticed that I even don't mention any particular size of images. Like I'm making relative because I think it's too dangerous to get into discussion about specific sizes in the Zoom for me.
Just to make sure I understood, it's just a thought experiment at the moment, but you're not doing it. Is it correct? The example that you showed is just you thinking about doing it.
If we're thinking about where, like, it's something like we're pushing around, so we're saying, like, what if, like, it is a what if, like, would it be attractive to someone like Nathalie? And like, I think from your reaction, she doesn't really think it is.
I think it's very interesting for public organization, because they will save a lot of money very soon, because they don't have to have an office in 2 or 3 years with your system, on your system. There won't have to be an office, they won't have to pay fee to come to the CEPIC. And no need, you know.
No, I don't think it's...
The private ones will have some difficulties, probably. I dream, you know.
A dreamer.
I dream with you.
I don't necessarily that like our intention is in some way to get rid of organizations, to make them obsolete in any way or form. And Europeana,
it's not our intention, but this is what will happen. If the public sector competes with the private sector, because this is what's happening, you're saying it's publicly funded. So it's the public money which is actually then competing with some private sector. This is what it is. So it's not the intention, but it's the consequence.
Shall we, maybe, let me just, like, I have one more example. I think it's just better to have this discussion, because this discussion can go very far. Like, let me finish my presentation and then I'm going to come back to your thing. I think, like, it's absolutely an important point about how that is competition between private and public sector. Like another thought experiment, again, like, this is not something which is currently being built. It may be built or not. It's something like, maybe Europeana could offer like something like an image embedding service, where like if material is available in a certain quality, we build something which is very similar. We would offer something which is similar to that initiative under, like, announced by Getty, like, I guess it's a couple of months ago now.
Put advertising on it?
Again, it's a thought experiment. We haven't thought about it. Like, Getty reserves the right to put advertising on it. I think Europeana wouldn't do that. You probably all have seen this, that Getty now allows for pretty much any purpose for parts of their collections to embed these images, and that can then be easily embedded in any type of website. So what if Europeana would be offering something very similar, and why may that be attractive to organizations who are providing imagery to us? Because one of the questions most of them dealing is what is actually the reach of a public institution that operates on the internet, that makes a material available that can be reused. It's very, very difficult to track reuse. Like, I mean, you can count visits to your own websites, but if you're giving something away, usually you obviously, like, you lose any connection with it, and it makes it very difficult to deal with it. For public institutions, and this is an example of a tender put out by the British Library, for example, so they just put out rewards 5 times £25,000 for somebody who comes to them with good ideas about how they can track the reuse elsewhere on the internet of public domain material that they are making available. I think this is going to become, for public institutions, a very important measure of their importance, like that they are doing, like, fulfilling their missions if they can show that their material is actually reused on other places. So one of the ideas is like if we could provide a centralized embedding service of Europeana, if you embed something obviously on a third-party website via a standardized form, you can track the use or at least the embeds there, so you can provide some kind of like statistics back to our data providers and show them the reach of the material that they have made available via Europeana. This is something we know to a number of, this is for lots of public institutions at the moment, a very difficult question, like how can we actually, like if we give something away, how can we measure that, how can we include that in our annual reports that we send to the ministries and something, because that is their justification for operating on the internet and you want to show something like that. So this is another thought experiment that we would build something on top of Europeana which would be very similar to like the Getty thing. Again, we would only offer that same as that web store thing if there is like a certain minimal quality that object available, because like you want to like such a service will most likely, if it ever will work, it would only work if it offers access to quality content and not like very tiny scaled up material which is of limited use to others. So these two thoughts experiments is like what concludes my presentation. I can imagine like especially the people who are not in who are not familiar with Europeana have maybe lots of basic questions. Maybe one thing before we go into the discussion, Europeana is in the end like it is a foundation also. Like it is run like it's a foundation which is comprised of generally European associations of the organizations who are members. So like generally, for example, the Conference of National Libraries or like the Association of European National Archives or something. So Europeana is a membership-driven thing. It is not like this independent entity which does things against the will of organizations. There is a representational model. There is a Europeana network which allows people like individuals also to make their voice heard in decisions Europeana has taken. It's a bit chaotic structure. People who work with Europeana will know that because it's made up of all of these different projects like Europeana Creative and Europeana Space and Europeana this and Europeana that. So it's not like a very well-focused like entity that operates single-minded in a specific decision. So it's a bit forward, backwards thing, but it is not like some kind of like evil plan of like a limited group of people to make offices redundant or something. It is in a way like it is an organization run by a lot of cultural heritage organizations across Europe have a big stake in it as well. Okay, thank you for your attention. I think that was slightly longer.
Before I go into any Q&A, I've got a panel here that I've basically just asked them one question, and I'm going to show this up here because I would like to throw this question out to the audience as well to see if there's any reaction on you. So this is the question. As a private, semi-private, public body, what is your response to making your images available under an open data model? Have you already done so? If so, what are the benefits and have you encountered any negative impact? Well, you know, as I said at the start, TopFoto has engaged in the Europeana project. There's very different levels of open data, as Paul was said. So the metadata for us, we had no problem sharing that. You know, that wasn't restricted. But the images, on the other hand, we're obviously, you know, we make money out of licensing images, so we can't give them away for free. But, you know, so what is the benefit if you do make them for free? Are there any other questions? So firstly, I would like to ask this question to Nathalie from Parisienne, the photography, Nathalie DOURY, also Roger-Viollet, and to see her response on this topic of open data.
Okay, thank you very much, John, for opening the discussion. There's a joke I heard about big data, which I think applies a lot to open data, which is, well, they say open data is like teenage sex. Everybody talks about it. A lot pretend to do it. Nobody has a clue. And I'm pretty sure this is a bit what we're talking about here. We've seen propositions from a very strong proponent of open data applied to cultural content. As far as I'm concerned, I'm speaking from the perspective of a semi-public operator. Parisienne de Photographie is a semi-public, which means semi-private entity controlled by the city of Paris and which has been created to digitize its cultural holdings, including a large photographic collection called Roger-Viollet, with which you may be familiar. And the content in, and I'm sorry, I'm saying content, I should say work of arts and documents, in the museums and the libraries of the city of Paris. So basically we digitize the content and we make it available through various media. One key aspect of our operation is that we are under a very specific French legal system, if you will, which is called the Délégation de Service Public, which means that I'm supposed to fund a big majority of my expenses through operation of the service, which actually means charging for the images that I provide. So obviously there is in itself some kind of a difficulty with open data. If you really look at what we've been doing recently, we have been engaged in two projects which are in a way open data oriented. The first one is obviously Europeana Photography, which is the project which has been described here by John, and for which we are providing about 35,000 images from our collection under the Europeana model, which means that all the metadata, and we believe that we are providing pretty rich metadata, that's not just the title, there's a lot of information, being made available under a CC0 license, which means public domain dedication. Anybody can use it for any type of use, no restriction on commercial use. But I'm talking metadata here. As far as the image is concerned, as Paul mentioned it, the idea is that we restrict the content and the use of the content based on our own terms of use. There is a big exception to that, and this is a big debate which is actually opposing us to Europeana, which is what of the public domain content reproductions we provide. Obviously, the City of Paris collections are very rich with photographic material, 19th century photographic material and early 20th century, including the works by Marville or Adjet, for example, which are part of the masterpieces of the collection, should be on Europeana. And should be distributed under the public domain mark. On this, we have a discussion and we have a problem with it. I have no problem providing accurate information about the nature of the rights attached to the image itself, providing information that this is indeed public domain. I mean, I couldn't hide it anyway, so let's be open about it. I do have an objection to making my pixels, I believe those are my pixels, available to all sorts of use. So there's a caveat here, and we are trying to work to improve that. The benefits so far of our participation to Europeana are threefold. The first one is visibility, visibility for the collections of the City of Paris. And on this one, I fully agree they should be accessible to anyone. Anyone should be able to look at them from any country in Europe and not have to actually launch a very complicated and difficult search on the portal of the City of Paris, which, if you have experimented it, makes absolutely impossible to find anything. So Europeana in that regard may be a very good approach to the general visibility of the collections. The second part is obviously I got some financial benefit from that because I got some subsidies to digitize the content. And obviously I am very willing to get some subsidies to digitize this content because, as you all know, digitizing original photographic material has a cost. The third thing is obviously it is generating some traffic to my commercial website. Not a lot, but there is some traffic. For the moment, it has not generated any sales, so I'm not seeing any benefits, economic benefit, but at least people get to know that we exist, that we have this material, and this is available for reuse for a fee. Second experiment with open data type of approach is a website which is targeted to the general public, which is called Paris en Images, Paris in Pictures, which is Parisienne de Photography's operated website, which displays 50,000 images from the photographic collections of the City of Paris, which used to be completely non-commercial at some point in time, where you can browse, select images, and the images are explicitly made available for reuse under certain terms. So I am doing open data. In fact, what I'm doing is not open data, I am doing open content, which is a bit different because here I am giving the users more rights than they would be entitled to under law, under copyright law, especially the fact that they can actually reproduce the images on blogs and all sorts of uses, but I am explicitly and very strongly precluding commercial reuse. And I think this is where the ball stops, as far as I'm concerned. Open data, I'm all for it as a citizen. I think that access to information should be as open as possible. I'm all for it for information which is vital to, let's say, human advancement, like genomic information or things like that. I think I am all for it for data which is not being reused at all by the institutions which produce it, and which is some kind of a mine of raw material which is not reused at all. Then I have no problem. Where the ball stops for me is basically when open data ideology, because this is in some instances an ideology, goes against the funding structure of a lot of my partner institutions, obviously the funding structure of the private institutions. And let me be very clear, for the moment we are funded 30% by the City of Paris, 70% by operations, operations meaning selling the content. If the choice is made to put all the data available under open content, how do you fund the service? Because it has a cost. Making the images available for the general public, preserving, let's say, digital copies of precious artifacts has a cost, preserving the artifacts themselves has a cost, documenting the images, producing the metadata, maintaining the website has a cost. So the choice is very clear, and I would say it's a political one. Do you want to actually fund it through taxpayers' money? Do you actually want it to fund it by charging the user of the material? As far as I'm concerned, I am all in favor of taxes for a number of things, but I'm not sure that the best use of our taxes is to actually help, let's say, the big internet giants increase their profits. So basically this is where I'm standing for the moment.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. I've also got on the panel Gaia, BIANCHI, LAVAGNA from Scala. I don't know if you have anything to add about open data in this question.
Yes, I think maybe the turning point stands at what we consider public domain, because I'm under the impression that would state that, for example, Scala, we deal with many museums, and so our content is, our best sellers are paintings, even though we are adding photography collections from other museums. Let's focus on paintings. If a painting is in public domain, it does not mean that the photograph of a painting is in public domain, at least according to the Italian law. For a certain period of time there is a strong protection, and a lot of the budget we use every year is dedicated to renew constantly our photographs. When an image has, when an image is faded, or when the artwork itself has been restored, we continuously make agreements with photographers, with our Ministry of Culture. We pay taxes to each local sovrintendenza to be able to shoot photographs, and these photographs may be very expensive. If you just to make an example, we shoot at night in the Galleria Borghese because we had to make some frescoes and we only could do that at night. I think more or less the cost per picture was like 500 euros. So if Paul would ask me, would you be happy to provide these images free of charge? No, not at all. I think we are already active in the open data direction. And I agree with Nathalie that as a citizen I find it very important also to have a platform competing or existing with Google, because Google's power is getting more and more scary. So it is very important, I think, that Europeana can play a key role, but I think that the size, the image size, is already good as it is. Paul was mentioning a 2000 pixel image.
Don't talk about pixels.
But he did. So our limit is 500 pixels. It's nothing. You can find much larger images in many websites if you have the time and patience to search. So that is my point. I mean, there is an investment in new photography, in maintaining faithful reproductions of works of art, maintaining a proper database, a properly working website, proper captions, translations, all that a picture library does, you know, better than me, copyright council, whatever, that if we were to say, okay, here is the 2000 pixel, you can reproduce it half a page or a quarter page, but now no problem, we will give you the very high res. This is completely in contradiction with all the investment we are making.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, there's a number of things I would want to respond to. And I think you asked the question at the moment: what is our concept of the public domain? And to some degree, like I've showed in this one slide, Europeana has this public domain charter where we say that if it's in the public domain in the analog form, it should remain the mere act of digitization of something, and that can be, I agree with you, that can be very expensive. But from a copyright perspective, expense is not a criterion for generating rights. From a copyright
maybe not in the Netherlands, I'm sorry.
Also, like,
in Italy it is.
In European, like in no European legal tradition, is the fact that you spend money on something you cannot
no, it's
buy.
not money. It's craftsmanship. It's
originality in copyright law. It's not
originality.
Yeah, originality, and a faithful reproduction of something is not something gives. In most things, but we also don't need to go into. We're actually having a research.
Under some legislation, it is the case. There is a quasi-copyright protection.
A quasi-copyright.
Italian law on mere reproductions. It does exist. You cannot say
you were asked for our approach to the public domain, and our approach, Europeana stated policy is that according to us, if you do business with us, we do not accept that. Period. Like that's the thing is, it may very well exist, and you may very well exercise, like think, okay, we need these additional rights. You can do business with someone else, but not with Europeana. That is our perspective.
I'm sorry, I don't understand why you're being so aggressive.
I'm not trying to.
No, you cannot do business with Europe. We participate.
Yeah.
To Europeana,
you are doing business with taxes.
We had.
Sorry.
I've never had any advantage money-wise nor traffic-wise, so. It's not the point you will not participate to Europeana. I would like to have a different approach, if possible.
The approach is that Europeana says, like, Europeana is very limited. Like, we're dependent on people working with us. Like, but we have a number of very small rules. One of the rules is, like, you need to give us a title of a work. Otherwise, if you don't give us a title of a work, we don't take it, right? One other rule that we have at the moment, if you give us something which is in the public domain, we want you to label that as public domain. That's also a rule that Europeana has. And if you, for whatever, and that may be very valid reasons that you describe from your perspective, but if you come to the conclusion, we would rather not do that, then we say, then maybe you don't have to give it to us because it doesn't conform to our rules, right? Like it's not like we can't force you to contribute to us. But Europeana has some standards and rules and things, like we are a completely public funded organization. We think it is important to preserve and to make available the material where copyright protection has expired to the European public, to the global public if you want, and allow them to participate in the public domain. There is reasons why copyright expires after a time, so that others can build on top of that. That creates problems in the commercial exploitation of things, but Europeana takes a stand here and says, like, this is our policy in this regard. And what I was, sorry, that sounded like, in that case, if you think, like, if you, from your perspective, come to the conclusion it doesn't make sense for us, or it undermines important parts of our business in working with an organization which has this set of policies or this specific policy, then my point would be, then you don't necessarily have to deal with us. Then maybe, like, you need to find other ways to expose your images. That can be your own thing. That could be a competing platform or something. But it's a choice that Europeana made fairly in the beginning of, like, that's from 2010, which is really like what?
Why you made this choice?
Why we made this choice is to some degree, like, first of all, it is very difficult for most organizations to provide, like, not necessarily photo libraries, but if you think because you're probably the exception in that sense, that most photo libraries also have arrangements that give them some stake in the rights in the material, in these, like, the collections that they have. Otherwise you couldn't do business very well. For museums, for libraries, they generally have the physical collections, but they generally do not have rights in this material. So big majority, like a library uses, like, and can make available, loan out under exceptions to copyright generally. Museums for a long time really didn't care about copyright. Once they had the objects and they could display them, they were happy. In some cases for catalogs or something you would need to deal with copyrights, but generally they do not have, like, a standing deal with rights holders that allows them to publish something or to sell something. I see you skeptical, you're probably thinking about the large museums, but think Europeana is for everything. Europeana is for the municipal museum which has a small collections of artifacts from that particular region somewhere in the south of Sweden as well. These people generally do not even have legal people on staff who are well versed in things. And so we said, like, and we saw, like, the majority of the content coming into Europeana in the beginning was public domain content, because that is the material which these organizations could digitize because they didn't need it to clear right, and then could make available to Europeana because there were no third parties exercising rights in this. So this is why historically the public domain is very important to Europeana. Europeana probably will always focus to a big deal to material which is out of copyright, because that is really the public content that everybody can deal with. I don't think an institution like Europeana is very well versed dealing with, like, in copyright popular material that is probably better exposed, managed by organizations like the organizations represented here for photography. Obviously, like, publishers of books are better at bringing into circulation, like, books that are under copyright and where there is considerable commercial interest. Libraries are then better if there's no considerable commercial interest anymore. So I think, like, Europeana's focus on the public domain is also explained. We are a public organization, we are not a commercial publishing entity, and in this sense, like, our focus will probably be more on that material, on that long tail type of material, right? So that's historically where we come from.
Yeah. I want to add that historically the Europeana is dominated by libraries, and the policy of the Europeana, the charter policy, is made by the libraries, because if you scan a book, just put it on a scanner and press a button, then this is definitely against
doesn't
free.
Right, yeah.
But if you photograph a museum object, this is something quite different. It needs much more skill to do this. And if you photograph, for instance, a three-dimensional object of a museum, this photo is definitely a photographic work. And if it's from a two-dimensional, let's say a painting or so, then according to many European laws, there is below the photographic work another section of protection. In Germany this is called Leistungsschutzrecht, And so these photographs are also protected in many countries for 50 years.
Let me give two very brief answers to that. Yes, you're correct. Like, I don't know if Europeana is necessarily dominated by the libraries. I think the libraries are the best organized stakeholder, and like we're trying not to be dominated by anyone, but like historically, like it also started as a European library and morphed into this broader thing. So maybe even dominated, at least in the beginning. To this question, like, are there rights generated in the process of digitization? Obviously, that is a question that comes back all the time, and obviously that is something that is also different. You hinted to that as well. For different jurisdictions in Europe, like there may be many different correct answers to this question depending on where you are. For that reason, as part of another project, we've commissioned someone at the University of Amsterdam to coordinate a research into like this question where like in all European member states, like they are working with legal scholars to make an inventory of or answer the question, are there third-party rights created, are there separate rights created in the process of digitization, and if so, describe them. So we're hoping to publish like a peer-reviewed overview of this question that hopefully you can present on a map, and maybe the green countries are then countries where it doesn't, and maybe there's yellow ones where it's questionable, but to have some more body for this discussion, because obviously it is an important discussion, and it is not our intention to just say like if there are rights created, we respect these rights, right? But we say we say still like we think like publicly funded entities should not exercise these rights. There's a thing, like you may be a museum, maybe there are rights created in the digitization of that thing. Still they are in contrast to like, it's not the painter's rights anymore, it's probably very close to the museum, and they can still make a choice if they want to exercise them, if they want to exercise them fully. Say they have the rights, like we are probably, like if there is clear rights in there, we are happy with them applying a Creative Commons license which does only allow non-commercial reusers, but we need to sort out this question and have a basic agreement on the facts in order to properly have this discussion. And at the moment, to be honest, we do not have this because like it's difficult to have an overview over 28 different countries.
I have a question from
I think that you talked always about digitation, which doesn't need, you don't need a human qualification to do that. It's a machine that does it and it's standard. I think what they want to point out is when there's a photograph, certain countries in Europe protect the photograph of a work of art. So I think that's a distinction between digitizing and a reproduction by photograph. Not an automatic machine, a photographic machine that you go, you press a button. No, when there's human intervention and qualification required. So that I think I wanted to clarify only because you talk about digitization and they talk about photograph.
No, but like for me, digitization is like that is a process of like this photograph, and like again, like there's separate, and we're doing really research in that. In some countries, probably the fact that a human or that some cost is involved in this creates, or that it is a photo.
So the cost doesn't. The cost is not an element.
Why in this Leistungsschutzrecht and in the data, if you come into the, like then you get in database rights, like cost is a thing.
But I'm talking about photography.
But again, what we're doing, like we're recognizing the fact that the discussion there, especially if you want to have the discussion on a European level, which we are forced to, right? Like we are in the center, we need to come up with policies which work for people in Italy as well as for people in the Netherlands. Like, and we want to have like, not like, we don't want 28 different policies for everything, we want one. So if you're at the center, like we first need to really get a better understanding about the variety of situations where rights are created, and we're doing research into that. We're going to have someone, hopefully like a preliminary presentation of that at an event here in July in Berlin, and then towards the end of the year a full-blown research report on that, which will be helpful for this.
Just a question, how is Europeana funded exactly?
European Commission, exactly.
And is that going to last forever, or are you going to have
Nothing is going to
be
last.
self-sustainable at some point?
Nothing's going to last forever. So historically, Europeana has been funded very messy through these research projects, which is like which creates a very messy funding situation. Europeana, the core infrastructure of Europeana now is part of the next 7-year budget of Europeana. So there is the Europeana, for the core of Europeana, the office, the website, like the core of the network to function, we have more or less security for the upcoming budget period of the European Commission. They have indicated also that they would like us to see to be less dependent on like European Commission funding at the end of this period. But for the time being,
This is one question. I mean, may I ask a question here? I'm sorry, I missed part of the presentation because I have to leave the room.
I'm just relaying information. So, like,
So are you looking for
I have a question.
financing at some point? Are you that something you're looking into, or not at all? Are you completely against it?
well, obviously they are looking into, like, on it quite honestly, like from like I can speak on behalf of Europeana in these kind of like rights issues. Like I am not an employee of Europeana, and I cannot talk on Europeana on financial strategy, but like honestly, obviously this is a public undertaking with like there is a political motivation behind that that will at least partially require public funding. I'm pretty certain. I think you will need to show like that you're also able to generate income from other sources. There is strategic discussions which I sometimes participate in it, but I can't really like make any statements. It's ongoing discussions.
Sorry, I have a question. I'm sorry I missed that because I had to. So you're part of this project, aren't you? Your two libraries, Scala and.
No,
Yeah, we are
in different
projects.
structures and different systems.
We're in the same
In
project.
different projects. So sorry about, maybe it was already covered, but you already provided some pictures within this project in the definition which is requested.
no,
no.
low-res.
No, okay.
There is no, at the moment there is also no, like, to be absolutely clear, there is no definition being requested at the
I think
moment.
there's a minimum for the thumbnail, which
Yeah,
is
which-
100 times
preview
200 pixels.
size
I'm
of-
fine with that.
Yeah.
Specified.
I'm actually doing more.
It's more the encouragement of
And what
Europeana
will
to
happen
open it up.
after when the project, the EU-funded project will be ended? What will you do? I mean, do you know already? Will you continue to cooperate with Europeana as well you are
There's a
doing now?
sustainability that we have to keep them on Europeana. That's part of the agreement.
Okay,
And if it's
Sylvia, I
traffic,
think
then
there's a debate probably among at least the Europeana Photography Group, which is basically, we've been having these discussions, not with Paul, but Paul has been part of it, with Europeana on the public domain content, and the fact that although we believe that information should be provided to the public, we have a disagreement over what it actually means in terms of the use of this, what we believe is a service we're providing, and what Europeana wants to keep on the copyright level. So there's a disagreement over that, and probably the fact that we arrived to a satisfactory resolution on that issue will obviously be a criteria for us to continue, provide more material or not.
Okay,
Because
okay.
this
So you
is-
will know,
this
you
is the
don't know
turning
yet.
point for
Yeah,
us.
okay.
The key point is that we are, still in control on our own sites because it's just a link through. So we think the information that we're putting on Europeana is possibly misleading for the end user because they misinterpret it when they actually come to our sites. They see public domain, oh, it's free,
Yeah,
it's
okay,
free.
they think
So
it's
then they
free.
come onto a site, but you can't actually get it. And I think this is as much a problem for Europeana as it is for us because it's two different messages and it's not clearly labelled, the way we see it.
Thank
Do
you.
you have one more question?
Just quickly. So you have copyrighted material on Europeana then,
Yeah.
and what is the terms, what are the terms of access? You can use them only for private, non-commercial use, and you pass that on
Well,
to the agency
You
for
decide.
commercial.
The provider decides.
Basically, we offer like a limited list of at the moment 13 different rights statements of them. Like obviously, like there's so you can apply Creative Commons license, in which case you grant certain rights for reuse. You can also say something like we have these statements, rights reserved, free access, which basically means all like traditional. This is in copyright. Obviously, like since it's on this website, you have free access to it. And then if you click through on that rights statement, it will tell you like, okay, this is free access. You can probably make reuse if it's under one of the exceptions and limitations to copyright, but like this is like there's no upfront permission grant. So you can have something, and we're not like we're trying our utter best to respect the rights of everybody who contributes. We're telling people like you accident, like we're also telling people you're giving us material to apply the public domain statement to us. To us it looks like it's in copyright. Are you really sure? Please fix this because this is wrong. We're trying to have correct information here, and it also works for in-copyright material. We're happy to take any in-copyright material if people manage to obtain the permission to make it available via their website.
And in a sense, for us, just that it has a strange impact, which means that probably if we go on working with Europeana, I will only put in copyright material, which I feel is a bit strange, because part of our common heritage, in a sense, are the marvin and the adjects. And these are the things that people would like to see, but on the other end, I want to show them, but not give them away. So there's a contradiction here, I feel, which we will try to resolve.
Can I ask one question? How many visitors, unique visitors that are not yourselves or your suppliers, do you have a year? Can you track that in a separate way of not how many times Scala has gone and seen to upload or to see their images, or yourselves through your own APIs? Can you keep that separate, and can you give us an amount of how many unique visitors?
I can't give it off the top of your head. If you're giving me your email address, we have web statistics.
Okay.
Like we have web statistics.
Because I think there's not that much traffic that comes back.
Comes back to where?
To the picture library.
There is. I can tell you we've tracked that, and there is.
Just
for us, traffic doesn't mean sales,
but no
traffic.
Because people do Europeana for non-commercial because it's free, so obviously they're not
No,
commercial.
but maybe Scala contributed with a few pictures, so there's not much traffic, but we haven't had
we see, like, I mean, I'm sorry, like, I usually do not get this question, so I can't give you an answer right now, but that is not because, like, I can give you an answer, but I need to talk to the people who can give me that information, and I'm happy to do that. Generally, like what you say, like, we're seeing for a number of organizations who contribute to us tell us something that we are one of their top referral traffic sources. Like, not the biggest ones, but like also not like a completely, like, it makes a visible like contribution to that. And generally, and this is to give my spin here again, we're also seeing a correlation. Obviously, the better the information, and that includes like the size of the images, the more interesting, the better the information is, the more this effect comes back. It's obviously like we have a lot of material on Europeana which has no previews, for example, which just has a placeholder image and maybe like a title and a year and like a very short author thing. That generally, like, these are not, that is not found when searching, that is not clicked on because it doesn't have a visual representation, and that as a consequence then obviously also doesn't lead to like referral traffic to
But on the fact that it generated quite a lot of traffic on our website, there's also a question of current news in a sense, because we provided some content which I've seen has been on the Europeana 14-18 website, because those were photographs from the First World War, and obviously this has been very well promoted and people actually click on that and then we'll go onto our website to see it. So there's also obviously a factor of whether this is opportune
Exactly, it's
at
a structure
a specific time,
seeing
material or not.
But this is for example, like, it's interesting that you mention this. This is when we try to talk about enabling third-party reuse. Like, we want other organizations, and we're not necessarily thinking about commercial organizations or something. We want people to be able to build expositions, virtual expositions like the 1940-1980 that we have done ourselves, but we want to enable others, be that educational publishers or like schools or like whatever other institutions, to pull in this aggregated wealth of information of Europeana and make these kind of expositions, and we're trying our best to like maintain all these links back to the organization again. So that is part of our reuse strategy, to enable these kind of things as well.
I think we'd better round it up, because we've got to get on to collecting societies, but I'd like to thank Paul, Nathalie and Gaia for an interesting discussion and your involvement. too. On the collecting societies side, I have done a quick survey about collecting societies with the national associations of CEPIC, just to get a feel of what's going on, because it's a topic that seems to be common to all of these. Is it working? Isn't it working? How can we make it better for our members to increase revenues? So there were 7 questions. It was all quite simple. The first one is who are the collecting societies? And this is a list of the collecting societies. And are you able to claim? So just in Italy, for example, we've got there is no collecting society scheme to claim from, but everywhere else has, so that's quite good. If you're receiving money, do you believe it's a fair price? We have Spain and UK both saying no. So they're areas that we want to look at. Are there any collecting management schemes that exist in your territory you believe you should be entitled to claim for? So there are a few, areas where we feel, we should be getting more share. Are collecting societies, one of their schemes, in competition in any part of your direct business? And there's a couple that say yes, which again, a lot of it was images, so they're running their own image library, for example. So in terms of direct competition, yes and no, because it's possibly individual, just like another picture library in the market. Do you pay any collecting societies any fee? If so, for what? And the interesting thing for me was that obviously there are some countries where websites, having a display on website is actually incurring a fee, and that doesn't happen in the UK. And part of the whole reason we're talking about collecting societies is the EU harmonisation, and there's a policy to bring all this together. So we're all speaking, just as Paul was saying, it's very difficult with all these different countries meeting the criteria. So how is everybody going to do it? And when you're talking about websites, it's global, so everybody can see it, so who should be paying? And also the cross-border issues is another thing.
In France, we pay both a display fee and a percentage of the license fee.
Right.
Oh, well, at least that's what ABAGP is requesting.
The same in
And
Spain.
you have access.
The same in Spain.
You have access.
And then the final question was, are you happy? And the two countries that said no was Spain and the UK. I can speak for the UK. I think we feel like we should be getting significantly more than we are getting from various schemes that are there, and we're not completely happy with the way that collecting societies are run and transparency, and that's also quite a common theme that I hear from a lot of territories, that they don't really explain how much they sometimes say how much they collect, but how they divide it up, how it's all run, where the shares are going. A lot of them are run by publishing associations, and there's a little bit of a closed door. But in the UK, there is now legislation which is bringing code of conduct, so transparency hopefully will become more apparent, so that we all understand what's going on and the shares, etc. Firstly, I'd like to ask Gaia, because she's on the panel and she helped me with the Italian part, to speak about collecting societies in Italy, and particularly the fact that I thought she answered yes, but they could be more cooperative. They didn't, and she pays out in Italy through a collecting society for various uses, but she doesn't have the ability to claim. So I thought that was quite the reverse, whether you should be happy that you're paying out and not receiving. So, Gaia, have you got...
Yeah, I mean, what I told you, what I wrote you, is that I am quite surprised that collecting societies try to ask for a share of the picture library's revenue, because they say, since you are selling a Picasso, if Picasso hadn't created the work, he wouldn't be able to license the image. Whereas we say yes, but without the image, we wouldn't be able to cash a reproduction right. So it's a different path, and we promote the artists in copyright. We try to make agreements with museums to have the most updated images and so on, to limit all the work that collecting societies have to do to approve the color and all these kind of issues. And we give a lot of information to all the users. A lot of people don't have a clue of what a collecting society is and what an artist's right is. So I think that we play a role which is due by law, but nevertheless, we help generate revenue for these collecting societies. So I believe we could also be entitled to a share of their revenue, not the opposite. And I believe, at least, we have the right not to be bothered with intentions about paying for web display and for a stake on our own revenues. I don't think this is fair. And for the time being, I have been approached by the AGP, and this is how I replied, by CI as well. It's a question of principle, it's not the money, but it would take, I don't know, an incredibly complicated management to reverse to collecting societies a share of our revenue for every artist per year, and I think it wouldn't make sense. What I would ask in terms of cooperation is, when as collecting societies know that a picture library has good quality images, they could say, okay, you want a Picasso, you can either go to Bridgman, to Scala, to RMN, rather than not caring at all. You can grab the image online, there's no problem for us in the end. They don't see us as an ally, but rather a competitor, which is really not the case. But that's my point.
I think I would also like to ask Marisol about Spain, because obviously that was another territory that says no, and how you see collecting societies in any way.
Well, we've been negotiating for 2 years now to try to get a standard contract for all libraries, a collaboration between the collecting society and libraries for public display of content and licensing the content that reproduces one of the work of arts that which author they represent. And it's quite complicated, and by asking, I'm working along with the lawyer of the Spanish Association, and when you dig in and you try to get information, you realize how inaccurate information they have, that they claim rights they don't have. So, you know, we try to have a contract, we don't have it right now, an agreement, but which should be fair. And for the time being, the lack of transparency, the inaccuracy of the data that they have makes it very difficult to reach an agreement. We are on the way. Now we're about to have an amendment to our copyright law, which will require more transparency on from collecting societies, and we hope that we're trying to postpone the agreement until the new law is enforced, and I think that then they will have no choice than to be much more transparent and provide us with accurate information that will allow us to come to an agreement, a reasonable agreement. Actually, the new law requires the fees to be very non-discriminatory and that take into account really the exploitation of the work of art. And in reality, we're not exploiting that much the work of art in itself. So that's a good argument, you know, to say, well, the fees, okay, by law you're allowed to get fees, but it has to be minimal, not the amounts they're claiming now, which are not minimal. So that's our way of focusing the case. And we're not too happy because that they really abuse their dominant position, at least in Spain. There's only one collecting society, and it really, the only way they're acting a bit more with prudence is because there's two lawyers on the other side. And that's the, but if a library would have to be face to face, they would have, you know, they would probably have, they're more cautious because we told them many things that, saying that we will not accept that and we will go to court if we have to.
And do you think EU harmonization will take this, you know, to your favor, or do you think that the local...
To our favor. If it would be more, I think we are in disadvantage in Spain.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anybody pays what they're asking. In other countries, the amount they're asking for.
What are they asking for?
5%, I think I gave it to you. 5% of the revenues generated through licensing, plus if you have more than 50,000 images, it's about 10,000 a year.
More than
50,000. So that's money. Without licensing, because that's without even like having it online. That's a lot of money.
Web display. Yeah.
So you know that's why we are like we're ready to litigate if we have to.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be conscious that it's important that in other countries, because if we agree to sign something like that that is not beneficial, it might be the start, you know, to be implemented in other, because they have agreements between them, the collecting society. So you have to be cautious, you know. Like we have to be cautious that we know that if we sign, it's the beginning of a way. That's why we're being, you know, because we see it that way. So you have to be cautious to not sign things that are not beneficial. It has to be reasonable, and that's it. That's what we're asking for, something reasonable.
Just a question: when you talk about display on the website of the picture agencies, is there a difference in the different countries between open access and access to registered users?
It's by law, it doesn't make any difference. When you display, the only exception to not require the authorization is if it's for personal use. If it's for anyone that can access it, like someone that you don't know that can access it, even if it's a registered user, it's not covered by the exception of copyright. So therefore, it is public display anyways.
But it can't be controlled by the.
The only thing you make it difficult for them to prove that you're having that content online, but it's not an exception of copyright. The fact that you need to register to see the image.
Is that the same in all European countries?
Yes, it is.
Is it?
It's a directive. It's a directive.
In France, maybe there is an exception that if your website is closed and you need...
I don't think so because it's the directive 2001. Probably the definition by the Court of Justice of Europe.
Really? Because in France we thought that closed websites are not in the same situation.
Unless they don't apply the directive. But the directive says that. The directive 2001.
Really?
Yeah. And there's judgments of the Court of Justice. I can send information on that.
We've got a few people that have to go, but we can have some extra questions if you like. Is there any more questions before we go? Okay, well, let's round up the session. The Collecting Society is really just a starting point. So if you have any more information or you would like any more information about the Collecting Society survey and you have some input, please email me or CEPIC to get information and newsletters involved and register your input. I'd like to thank you again for coming to this session. I'd also like to thank Paul, Nathalie and Gaia on the panel, and also Marisol there for adding comments into Spain Collecting Societies. And I hope you enjoy the Congress, and it's very, very useful for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For coming in.